All right, video two is really going to be working with radians. Like what is a radian, right? For our purposes, we'll get into like radians as it relates to the radius and all that stuff. It's a huge part of pre-calc, right? Why is it called a radian? Does it have anything to do with a radius? The answer is yes. But for our purposes today, without getting too much into pre-calculus, is just we want to be able to measure with it. So our reference point will always be that 180 degrees is the exact same thing as pi radians. You're like, what does that mean? Well, it's 3.14, right? So 3.14 radians is my 180 degrees. You can think that every one radian is like 57 degrees, but I think it's easier to deal with things in terms of pi because a lot of times you get these fractions with pi in it. So if I said measure 180 degrees, that would be the exact same thing as if I said measure pi radians, right? So if I said draw pi radians, you'd be like, oh, okay, well, that's right there. It's 180 degrees. So that's 1 pi, right? So now if I said, well, what's a half pi, which is pi over 2? Well, half of pi, if pi is straight across, half of pi is only half of straight across, right? Which is the exact same thing as 90 degrees. So pi over 2 radians is the same thing as 90 degrees, right? One's in degrees, one's in radians. 3 pi over 2, right? So again, that's 1 pi over 2, or, a half a pi. That was pi itself. So 3 halves is the same thing as 1.5, so 1.5 times, right? So that would be the same thing as 270 degrees. Right? If you think of every half pi as 90 degrees, I think it helps you. So like right there is 1 half, all the way to there is 2 halves, which is the same thing as 1 pi. And then 3 halves, right? So it ends right there. Next, we could do, 2 pi, right? So 2 pi, again, just think of halves. That's 1 half pi, that's 2 halves pi, or just 1 pi. That's 3 halves pi. And so 4 halves is the same thing as 2, right? 4 divided by 2. So 4 halves pi is the same thing as 2 pi, which is the exact same thing as 360 degrees. So if I did, and then my next one looks like it says 0 pi, right? So 0 pi is just, it's the same thing as 0 degrees. So 0 pi and 0 degrees are the exact same thing. What some people do to help them remember when they're doing radians is they'll actually label this as pi over 2, this is pi, and this is 3 pi over 2. And those are kind of like references for them. So 0 pi or 2 pi would be that same starting point. And then they can kind of work off that, right? So, if I said negative 3 pi over 2, negative 3 pi over 2. So remember, we're going to go clockwise because it's negative. So that's negative pi over 2 because that's negative 90 degrees. Negative pi, negative 3 pi over 2 is the exact same spot as positive pi over 2. Negative pi, same exact spot as positive pi. Just negative 180 degrees instead of positive 180 degrees. 9 pi over 2 is going to be a bigger angle, right? It's positive, so we're going to go clockwise. So 9 pi over 2, right? That's 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, 4 pi over 2, 5 pi over 2, 6 pi over 2, same thing as 3 pi, 7 pi over 2, 8 pi over 2, same thing as 4 pi, which is 720 degrees, and then 9 pi over 2, right? So that's how you can think of it. If you break everything up into pi over 2s as every 90 degrees, I think it helps. Negative 11 pi over 3. All right, so now we're dealing with thirds, right? So what I would say is, all right, a negative 11 pi over 3. I know that that's the same thing as negative 6 pi. Well, I could think of it as, yeah, that's fine. Negative 6 pi over 3, and then minus, another 5 pi over 3, or plus a negative 5 pi over 3. And if I think of it that way, the only reason I broke it down like that is because 6 thirds, right? That's the same thing as 2 pi, or negative 2 pi. And I should, okay, well, I know negative 2 pi. Oh, I'm actually going negative, so. Negative 2 pi is right there. It's the same thing as negative 360 degrees, right? So now I have 5 thirds pi, right? So I could even think of 5 thirds as, all right, well, I know 3 thirds is the same thing as pi, so that's all the way across. right? So I could break this into negative 3 pi over 3, which is straight across, and then plus another negative 2 pi over 3. And so now I've gotten my 3 pi over 3 done to that point. So now I just have to go 2/3 of the way over. I think of it in terms of fractions, because pi, another 3/3 would be all the way over. So 2/3 would basically be stopping 2/3 of the way over. So that's actually what negative 11/3 pi, that's what negative 11/3 pi would look like. Oh, I skipped through them. Pi over 4 is a fourth pi, right? So again, if this is half pi, and this is full pi, 1/4 pi would be half of a half. It's the exact same thing as 45 degrees. 1 is trickier, right? 1 is not in terms of pi. So that's kind of going back to what we thought of when we started the warm-up. 1 just means 1 radian, which is about 57 degrees, right? So like maybe something like there. And then negative 2 might be a little trickier. You know, negative, right? This is negative pi over 2 if I want to do that. And pi over, like pi is 3.14. So pi over 2 would be, you know, like 1.57, you know. So just to kind of have an idea of where negative 2 would be, right? That's negative 3.14, negative pi. That's negative 1.57. So if I needed negative 2, you know, it's probably going to be, it's closer to negative 1.57 to 3.14. So, you know, I could think of it like right there. You could also think of it as 57 degrees plus 57 degrees. If 1 radian is 57 degrees, 2 radians is, you know, just that doubled pretty much. You know, so you can kind of go off that as well. So that's how you'd measure